The gunshot echoed through the empty streets of Hamilton, Montana. As Dr. Lillian Lawson hurried through the rain toward the sound, her medical bag clutched tightly in her gloved hand. The year was 1879, and trouble never announced itself politely in this frontier town, especially not after midnight during a spring downpour. Dr. Lawson. A young boy sprinted toward her, his boots splashing through puddles, his face pale with fright. "It's old man Peterson's place." "There's been shootin'." Lillian quickened her pace, her skirts gathered in one hand to keep them from the mud. At 32, she'd spent the last 4 years as Hamilton's only physician, battling not just illness but the constant skepticism that a woman could practice medicine competently. Every emergency was another chance to prove herself, or to fail spectacularly in the eyes of those waiting for her to do just that. The Peterson homestead sat at the edge of town, a modest cabin with a small barn behind it. As Lillian approached, she could see a cluster of men gathered on the porch, their faces grim in the lamplight. "Where's the patient?" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The men parted to reveal Sheriff Davis, kneeling beside a body on the porch floor. "It's bad, Doc." "Real bad." "Then step aside and let me work," she said firmly, dropping to her knees beside the wounded man. It wasn't Peterson at all, but a stranger, a tall man with broad shoulders, his face contorted in pain, blood seeping through his fingers where they pressed against his left side. Despite his pallor, she noted his strong features and the determined set of his jaw as he fought against unconsciousness. "Name's Ross Jennings," Sheriff Davis supplied. "Says he rode in from the Blackfoot Valley, got caught stealing Peterson's horses." "I wasn't stealing," the wounded man grunted through clenched teeth. "I was tracking the men who took my daughter. Their trail led here." Lillian's hands moved efficiently, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt. "Your daughter's been kidnapped last night." "From our homestead," he managed before his eyes rolled back. "We need to get him inside. Now." Lillian took charge, directing the men to carry Ross into Peterson's cabin. "And someone fetch my assistant, Martha, from the clinic." Hours later, as dawn broke over the mountains, Lillian finally extracted the bullet from Ross Jennings' side. It had missed his vital organs by mere inches, a lucky man, despite everything else that had befallen him. "He'll live," she told Sheriff Davis, who'd remained throughout the surgery. "But he needs rest, and his story needs investigating." "Already sent riders out," Davis replied. "If there's a child missing, we'll find her." Lillian nodded, washing blood from her hands in a basin. "He mentioned a ranch in Blackfoot Valley. Does he have family there who should be notified?" "Just him and the girl, from what I gather. Wife died in childbirth about 6 years back." A widower raising a daughter alone in this harsh country. Lillian felt a pang of sympathy. She knew about loss, about solitude. 4 years in Hamilton had earned her respect as a doctor, but little else. No close friendships, no courtships, just an endless cycle of patients, emergencies, and returning to her empty rooms above the clinic. As she dried her hands, Ross stirred, his eyes fluttering open, remarkably clear considering his ordeal. Deep brown eyes that fixed immediately on her face. "My daughter," he whispered hoarsely. "The sheriff has men looking for her," Lillian assured him. "You need to rest. Her name is Emma. She's 8 years old, dark hair, blue eyes like her mother's." His hand shot out, grasping Lillian's wrist with surprising strength. "Please, she's all I have." Lillian gently pried his fingers loose. "You won't help her by reopening that wound, Mr. Jennings. Rest now. I promise we'll find her." It was rash to make such a promise, but something in the man's desperate eyes compelled her. She'd seen that same look in her own mirror after her brother died of typhoid fever. When she was 18, the devastation of losing the last person who truly mattered to you. 3 men, Ross continued, fighting against the laudanum she'd administered. One with a scar across his cheek. They've been rustling cattle across the territory. They took Emma because she saw their faces when they came to our ranch. Sheriff Davis, Lillian called. Did you hear that? But Ross had more to say, struggling to sit up despite Lillian's attempts to keep him still. They said, Bitter Creek. Something about meeting buyers at Bitter Creek. With that, he fell back against the pillow, consciousness slipping away again. Lillian adjusted the blanket over him and turned to the sheriff. Bitter Creek's a 2-day ride north, Davis said, frowning, if they've got a head start. Then we need to send your fastest riders, Lillian insisted. A child's life is at stake. I'll do what I can, Doc, but with the spring melt making the rivers high, and only a vague description to go on, Lillian's normally calm demeanor cracked slightly. She's 8 years old, Sheriff. Out there with men who wouldn't think twice about shooting her father. What if it were your Becky? The sheriff's face hardened at the mention of his own daughter, but he nodded. I'll send my best men, and I'll telegraph the marshal in Butte to watch for them. After the sheriff left, Lillian settled into a chair beside Ross's bed. She should have gone back to her clinic. There would be patients waiting by now, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Martha could handle the minor ailments for a few hours. Something about this man's plight had touched her deeply. Perhaps it was because she recognized in him the same isolation she felt. Or perhaps it was simply that his daughter's predicament awakened every protective instinct she possessed. Either way, she found herself keeping vigil as the morning progressed, changing his bandages and monitoring his fever. It was midday when Ross woke again, more lucid this time. His eyes found hers immediately. Dr. Lawson, Lillian Lawson, she supplied, offering him water. He drank gratefully before asking, any word of Emma? Not yet, but the sheriff has men searching and telegrams have been sent to neighboring towns. She checked his bandage. The wound looks clean. You were fortunate. Not feeling particularly fortunate at the moment, he said grimly. You're alive, Mr. Jennings. That means you can help find your daughter. He studied her face for a long moment. You're not from around here originally. Lillian raised an eyebrow. Is my Boston accent still so apparent? I've been in Montana for 4 years. It's not the accent, it's the... He gestured vaguely with one hand. The way you carry yourself, like someone who's seen bigger places than Hamilton. I was educated in Philadelphia, she said. The Women's Medical College, one of the few places that would train female physicians. And you came all the way out here. I went where I was needed. She didn't elaborate on the rejection letters from Eastern hospitals, the condescension from male colleagues, the desperate need to prove herself. Now, tell me more about these men who took your daughter. The more details we have, the better chance of finding her. Ross pushed himself up against the pillows, wincing. I've been tracking them for months. They started with small operations, a few head of cattle here and there. But they've gotten bolder. 2 weeks ago, they hit the McKinnon place north of us, shot the foreman when he tried to stop them. And they came to your ranch next, 3 nights ago. I was out checking the herd. Emma was supposed to be asleep, but she heard their horses and got curious. His voice cracked slightly. If I'd been there, you might be dead, Lillian said firmly. And then who would be searching for her? A commotion outside interrupted them. Moments later, Sheriff Davis burst through the door, his expression grave. Found something, he said without preamble. One of the Blackfoot boys was hunting up near Eagle Creek, found a child's shoe beside the trail. He held up a small, worn boot. He says there were tracks of several horses, heading toward Bitter Creek like you said. Ross's face drained of color as he recognized his daughter's boot. I need to go after her. You'll tear open that wound and bleed to death before you make it 10 miles, Lillian objected. Then stitch me up tighter, he growled. Already swinging his legs over the side of the bed, Lillian placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Even if I did, you've lost too much blood. You need at least 2 days of rest before you can ride." In 2 days she could be. He couldn't finish the sentence. Sheriff Davis stepped forward. "I've got 5 men ready to ride, Jennings. Good men who know that country. If your girl's on that trail, they'll find her." "No offense to your men, Sheriff, but they don't know what these rustlers look like. I do." Ross's determination was etched in every line of his face. "And they don't love her like I do." Lillian exchanged a glance with the sheriff. She understood both men's positions, the sheriff's duty to maintain order and Ross's desperate need to save his child. But as a doctor, she also knew the medical reality. "What if I went with them?" she heard herself say. Both men stared at her. "You?" the sheriff asked incredulously. "I can identify the child," Lillian said, thinking quickly. "I can treat her if she's injured, and Mr. Jennings can provide descriptions and details that might help track these men." "It's no place for a woman," Ross objected, though she could see the conflict in his eyes, the need for her medical skills versus the danger of the journey. Lillian straightened her shoulders. "I've ridden with the circuit judge to remote homesteads. I've delivered babies during blizzards and treated gunshot wounds in mining camps. I'm not some delicate Eastern flower, Mr. Jennings." Before Ross could argue further, there was another interruption, Martha bursting through the door, her round face flushed with exertion. "Dr. Lawson." "Come quick. It's the Wilkins baby. He's having terrible convulsions," duty called, as it always did. Lillian gathered her medical bag. "Sheriff, delay your men's departure by 1 hour. I'll meet them at the livery after I see to the Wilkins child." She hurried out before either man could object, Martha rushing alongside her with details of the baby's symptoms. But even as she focused on her immediate patient, part of her mind was already preparing for the journey ahead, cataloging medicines she would need, supplies for herself, and a potentially injured child, proper clothing for the rugged trail. She had made a promise to Ross Jennings, spoken and unspoken, and Lillian Lawson did not break her promises. The Wilkins baby's convulsions turned out to be febrile seizures, frightening but treatable. After bringing the infant's fever down and instructing the parents on his care, Lillian rushed back to her clinic to prepare for the search party. Martha followed her, wringing her hands. "Doctor, you can't be serious about riding with those men. It's dangerous. These are criminals who have already shot a man." "Which is precisely why they need a doctor along," Lillian replied, packing her medical saddlebags with bandages, laudanum, and other essentials. "And why that little girl needs to be found quickly." "But your patient's here. You've assisted me long enough to handle minor ailments. Dr. Henderson in Stevensville said he could ride over for emergencies." Lillian paused her packing to look directly at her assistant. "Martha, what would you do if it were your nephew missing?" Martha's resistance crumbled. "At least take my husband's revolver and his heavy coat. The nights are still cold in the mountains." Armed with Martha's practical additions and dressed in her split riding skirt and sturdiest boots, Lillian arrived at the livery to find the search party waiting. 5 men, the sheriff's deputy, and 4 volunteers, all looking uncomfortable at the prospect of a female companion. "Doc," Deputy Miller touched his hat respectfully, though his expression remained doubtful. "Sheriff says you're coming along." "That's right," Lillian said, securing her medical bags to the roan mare the livery had provided. "Has Mr. Jennings given you descriptions of the kidnappers and his daughter?" "He has, and he's given us something else too." Lillian turned to see Ross Jennings himself being helped toward them, mounted on a sturdy black gelding. His face was gray with pain, but his jaw was set in stubborn determination. "Mr. Jennings," she exclaimed, "You can't possibly. My decision's made, doctor," he said firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but Emma needs me." Lillian moved her mare alongside his horse, keeping her voice low. "You're risking your life. That wound could reopen with the first hard ride. Then it's fortunate I'll have a doctor with me, isn't it?" His eyes, though clouded with pain, held a resolve she couldn't counter. Deputy Miller cleared his throat. "If we're going, we need to get moving. Daylight's burning, and there's a storm coming in from the northwest." Lillian gave Ross one last stern look. "You'll follow my medical instructions on the trail, or I'll have these men tie you to your saddle and bring you straight back to town." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." The small party set out, following the trail north toward Eagle Creek. Lillian found herself riding beside Ross, keeping a critical eye on his condition. He sat his saddle well despite his injury, though she could see the effort it cost him. "Tell me about Emma," she said after they'd been riding for some time, hoping conversation might distract him from his pain. The change in his expression was immediate, a softening around the eyes, a warmth in his voice. "She's something special. Smart as a whip. Taught herself to read almost before I realized what she was doing. Her mother left some books, and Emma treasures them." "She sounds remarkable," Lillian said sincerely. "Headstrong, too," he added with a hint of pride. "Gets that from her mother. Rebecca was," he paused, swallowing hard. "Rebecca never backed down from anything in her life, except the fever that took her." Lillian nodded, understanding the grief that still colored his words. "And you've been raising Emma alone since then." "We've been raising each other in a way." He adjusted his position carefully, wincing. "It hasn't been easy. Ranch work doesn't wait for a man to figure out how to braid a little girl's hair or explain why the sky is blue. Yet you managed. Had to. She's everything." His expression darkened. "If those men harm her, let's focus on finding her first," Lillian interjected gently. "Children are resilient, and from what you've told me, Emma is especially so." They rode on, the landscape changing gradually as they moved into more rugged country. Pine forests gave way to rocky outcroppings, and the trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. Deputy Miller led the way, following tracks that Lillian couldn't discern, but that the experienced frontiersmen in their party read as clearly as she read a medical text. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the first spatters of rain began to fall. Miller signaled a halt beside a sheltered overhang. "We'll make camp here," he announced. "No use pushing on in the dark with a storm coming." Ross looked ready to object, but a sharp look from Lillian silenced him. They dismounted, the men efficiently setting up a rudimentary camp while Lillian insisted on checking Ross's wound. "It's holding," she told him after her examination, "but you're pushing yourself too hard. Your body needs rest to heal." "Rest will come when Emma's safe," he replied, though he accepted the pain medicine she offered without argument. The storm broke in earnest as they huddled under the rocky overhang, lightning illuminating the valley below in brief, brilliant flashes. The men took turns keeping watch while the others tried to sleep on the hard ground. Lillian found sleep elusive, her mind racing with worries about Emma Jennings and the dangers that lay ahead. She was also acutely aware of Ross lying nearby, his breathing uneven with pain despite his attempts to hide it. "You should be sleeping, doctor," he said softly, proving her suspicion that he was awake. "So should you, Mr. Jennings." "Ross," he corrected. "If we're riding into danger together, seems we should be on a first-name basis." "Ross, then," she agreed. "And I'm Lillian." A flash of lightning illuminated his face, showing a small smile. "Lillian, it suits you." They fell silent for a moment, listening to the rain and distant thunder. "Why did you really come on this search?" he asked eventually. "You could have stayed safely in Hamilton." Lillian considered her answer carefully. "I became a doctor to save lives. Emma's life is at risk. It's as simple as that." "Nothing's ever that simple," Ross countered. "Especially not out here." "Perhaps not," she acknowledged. "I suppose I also understand what it's like to be alone, to have no one looking out for you but yourself." "Is that why you came to Montana? To be alone?" "I came for the opportunity to practice real medicine without constant supervision and criticism. In Philadelphia, they would barely let me near a patient without a male doctor hovering over me." She shifted on her bedroll, trying to find a more comfortable position. "Out here, people care more about whether you can stop their bleeding than whether you wear skirts." "Not everyone," Ross observed. "I've seen how some of those men look at you like they're just waiting for you to faint at the first sign of trouble." Lillian chuckled softly. "They've been waiting for 4 years. They'll be waiting a good while longer." Another silence fell between them, more comfortable than the last. "If when we find Emma," Ross said hesitantly, "I hope you'll let me properly thank you for everything you've done." "Just doing my duty," Lillian replied automatically. "No, you've gone far beyond duty." His voice held a warmth that caught her off guard. Not many would have risked this journey for strangers. Before Lillian could respond, Deputy Miller's urgent whisper cut through the darkness. "Riders coming up the trail." Everyone was instantly alert, hands moving to weapons. Ross struggled to his feet, grimacing with pain but determined. "Stay back," Miller ordered in a harsh whisper. "Could be our rustlers." They extinguished their small fire and pressed back against the rock wall, listening to the approaching hoofbeats. Lillian found herself standing shoulder to shoulder with Ross, feeling the tension in his body. The riders, 3 of them, appeared through the rain, moving slowly along the trail below their position. Even in the poor light, Lillian could make out the distinctive shape of a man with something smaller held before him on the saddle. "Emma," Ross breathed, starting forward. Miller grabbed his arm. "Hold steady. We're outnumbered if they've got friends nearby." "That's my daughter," Ross hissed. Lillian placed a restraining hand on his other arm. "If we startle them, someone could get hurt, Emma included." The riders passed below them, unaware of their presence, and continued up the trail. Once they were out of earshot, Miller gathered the group. "They're heading for Bitter Creek, just like you said," he told Ross. "But we need to be smart about this. We'll follow at a distance, see where they make camp, then we can plan our move." Ross was clearly frustrated but nodded reluctantly. "I saw Emma. She was moving. Alive." "That's good news," Lillian said encouragingly, though she was deeply concerned about the child's condition after days in captivity. They broke camp quickly and followed the trail, keeping a safe distance behind the rustlers. The rain eventually eased, giving way to a damp, chilly night. Their progress was slow in the darkness, but Miller was determined not to lose the trail. Dawn found them approaching a narrow valley where Bitter Creek wound between steep hillsides. Miller signaled a halt, pointing to a thin wisp of smoke rising from a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. "That'll be their camp," he whispered. "We'll circle around, come at them from different directions." The plan was quickly formed. Miller and 2 men would approach from the south, the others from the north and east. Ross insisted on joining the assault despite Lillian's objections. "And where will you be during all this?" he asked her pointedly. "Close enough to help if anyone's injured," she replied firmly. "Far enough away to stay out of the line of fire." Ross held her gaze for a long moment. "Be careful, Lillian. You're the one with a bullet wound," she reminded him. A brief smile crossed his face before he turned to join Miller's group. Lillian found a position behind a large boulder that afforded a view of the camp while providing cover. From there, She could see 3 men moving around a small fire. A fourth figure, small and still, lay wrapped in blankets near the fire. Emma. The attack came swiftly. Miller's men emerged from cover simultaneously, rifles raised, ordering the rustlers to surrender. For a moment, it seemed they might comply, then one of the men dove for his weapon. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the valley. Lillian crouched lower behind her boulder, heart pounding, straining to see what was happening through the chaos. 2 of the rustlers fell quickly. The third, a man with a distinctive scarred face, grabbed Emma from her blankets, using her as a shield as he backed toward the horses. "Drop your weapons or she dies," he shouted. The lawman hesitated, unwilling to risk the child. But as the standoff continued, Lillian saw Ross moving stealthily around the perimeter of the camp, approaching from behind the rustler. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Ross lunged at the scarred man. Emma screamed. There was a struggle, another gunshot. All 3 figures disappeared behind the horses. Lillian was running before she realized she'd left her cover, medical bag clutched in her hand, heedless of any remaining danger. She rounded the horses to find Ross on his knees, Emma clutched in his arms, and the rustler sprawled motionless on the ground nearby. "Ross, Emma," she called, dropping beside them. Ross looked up, his face pale but triumphant. "She's all right, scared but all right." Emma, a small, dark-haired girl with striking blue eyes, stared at Lillian warily, clinging to her father. "Emma, this is Dr. Lawson," Ross said gently. "She helped find you." Lillian smiled reassuringly. "Hello, Emma. I'm very glad to meet you. Would it be all right if I check to make sure you're not hurt?" The girl nodded hesitantly, allowing Lillian to examine her. Besides minor bruises and scratches, she appeared unharmed physically, at least. The emotional trauma would take longer to heal. "You're a very brave girl," Lillian told her when she'd finished her examination. "Your father has been so worried about you." "I knew he'd come," Emma said with absolute conviction, her first word since the rescue. "Papa always comes." Lillian noticed then that Ross was swaying slightly, his face ashen. "Ross, let me see." He reluctantly loosened his grip on Emma, revealing a spreading bloodstain on his shirt. "Might have torn something," he admitted. "The wound's reopened," Lillian confirmed, helping him lie back while keeping Emma close. "I need to stop the bleeding." As she worked to stabilize Ross, Deputy Miller approached. "Both rustlers are dead. The third won't make it. They've got quite a haul of stolen cattle in a box canyon about a mile up the creek. We need to get Ross back to Hamilton as quickly as possible," Lillian said, not looking up from her work. "He's lost too much blood." "Nearest town is Granite Springs, about 4 hours' ride," Miller replied. "He won't make it all the way to Hamilton in this condition." Lillian nodded grimly. "Granite Springs, then, as soon as I have him stable enough to travel." Emma watched anxiously as Lillian rebandaged her father's wound. "Is Papa going to die like Mama did?" The direct question, asked with such childish fear and adult understanding, caught Lillian off guard. She met Emma's blue eyes steadily. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Your Papa is strong and I'm a very good doctor." "The best," Ross murmured, reaching for his daughter's hand. They fashioned a travois for Ross, using branches and blankets attached to the steadiest horse. Emma refused to be separated from her father, so Lillian took the girl up on her own mount for the journey to Granite Springs. As they rode, Emma gradually relaxed, eventually telling Lillian about her ordeal, how the men had taken her when she'd seen them scouting their ranch, how they'd kept her blindfolded much of the time but hadn't hurt her. "They argued a lot," she said. "The man with the scar wanted to leave me somewhere, but the older man said I'd seen their faces. Lillian kept her voice casual despite her horror at what might have happened. You remembered a lot of important details. That helped your father find you. Papa says I notice things like Mama did. Emma leaned back against Lillian, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She was smart. Papa says I got her brains and his stubbornness. Sounds like a good combination to me, Lillian smiled, feeling an unexpected tenderness for this resilient child. Granite Springs proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings serving local miners and ranchers, but it did boast a small hotel where they could secure rooms. The local barber, who doubled as the town's medical practitioner, was happy to defer to Lillian once he realized she was a trained physician. Ross was settled in the hotel's best room, with Emma refusing to leave his side. His condition was serious but stable. The wound itself was clean, but blood loss and exhaustion had taken their toll. You both need rest, Lillian told them after she'd done all she could. I'll be right next door if you need anything. Emma, curled beside her father on the bed, looked up solemnly. Promise you won't leave? The question tugged at something deep inside Lillian. I promise. For 3 days, they remained in Granite Springs while Ross recovered enough strength for the journey back to Hamilton. Lillian divided her time between caring for Ross, keeping Emma occupied, and treating various ailments among the townsfolk, who quickly learned a real doctor was in their midst. On the evening of the 3rd day, with Ross sitting up and taking solid food, Lillian returned from setting a miner's broken arm to find Emma reading aloud to her father from a book the hotel owner's wife had loaned her. And the prince knew at once that she was the one he had been searching for all along. Emma read carefully, her small finger tracing the words. Ross looked up as Lillian entered, his expression softening in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. How's our local hero? He asked. Hardly a hero, Lillian demurred, checking his bandages. Just doing my job. Is that what you call riding into the wilderness after armed kidnappers? He challenged with a hint of a smile. Occupational hazard in Montana, she replied lightly. Emma closed her book. Are you married, Doctor? Lawson? Emma, Ross admonished, though he looked equally interested in the answer. Lillian laughed. No, Emma, I'm not married. Why not? You're pretty and you save people. Well, thank you, Lillian said, touched by the child's directness. But being a doctor keeps me very busy. And not everyone wants a wife who might be called away at any hour to deliver babies or set broken bones. Papa's not married either, Emma continued, ignoring her father's increasingly embarrassed expression. Not since Mama died. He says it's just us against the world. Emma, I think it's time for you to get ready for bed, Ross intervened. The girl sighed dramatically but obeyed, gathering her nightclothes and heading to the washroom. I apologize for the interrogation, Ross said when she'd gone. She doesn't usually take to people so quickly. No apology needed. She's a wonderful child. She likes you, he said simply. So do I. The direct statement caught Lillian off guard. You're just grateful because I helped find her. It's more than that. His eyes held hers steadily. I've spent 6 years raising a daughter alone, focused only on survival. I haven't allowed myself to think beyond our next season, our next cattle drive. That's understandable, Lillian said carefully. Maybe. But meeting you, seeing how you live your life with such purpose, such conviction, it's made me think about what Emma and I might be missing. He reached for her hand. When we get back to Hamilton, I'd like to call on you properly, if you'd permit it. Lillian felt a rush of emotions she'd long suppressed: hope, attraction, fear. My practice takes up most of my time, she said, withdrawing her hand gently. I'm aware. Just as my ranch demands most of mine. His gaze remained steady, but perhaps we both deserve more than just our work. Before Lillian could respond, Emma returned, saving her from having to answer immediately. But as she bid them good night and returned to her own room, Ross's words echoed in her mind. The journey back to Hamilton took 2 days, with frequent stops to allow Ross to rest. By the time they arrived, word of Emma's rescue had spread throughout the town. A small crowd gathered as they rode in, offering congratulations and support. Martha rushed from the clinic, enveloping Lillian in a relieved embrace before helping to settle Ross and Emma in the rooms above the clinic for continued care. "The whole town's been talking about nothing else," Martha whispered as they prepared fresh bandages. "You're quite the heroine, Doctor." "Hardly," Lillian replied. "I just did what needed doing." "And that's exactly why they're talking," Martha said shrewdly. "That and the way Mr. Jennings looks at you." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "He's my patient, Martha, MMHMM. And a handsome widower with a sweet daughter who clearly adores you." Martha's eyes twinkled. "I've been your assistant for 4 years, Doctor. I've never seen you blush over a patient before." Lillian couldn't deny the truth in Martha's observation. During their journey, something had changed between her and Ross, a connection forming through shared danger and mutual respect. For the next week, Ross and Emma remained at the clinic. As his strength returned, Ross spoke of returning to his ranch, but each day found another reason to delay: a slight fever, concern about the journey's strain, Emma's request to explore the town. Lillian knew they would have to leave eventually. Ross had a ranch to run and she had her practice. But each evening spent talking after Emma was asleep, each shared meal, each moment watching Ross and Emma together made the inevitable separation more difficult to contemplate. "Tell me about your ranch," she asked one evening as they sat on the clinic's small back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "It's nothing fancy," Ross said. 200 acres in a valley with good water, log house my father built 20 years ago. We run about 60 head of cattle, some horses. It sounds peaceful. It can be. Isolated too, especially in winter." He glanced at her. "Emma's been without feminine influence since Rebecca died. Having you these past days, she's blossomed." "She's an extraordinary child," Lillian said sincerely. "You've done a remarkable job raising her. I've done my best, but there are things a father can't provide." He turned to face her fully. "Lillian, I've been thinking about what happens when we leave Hamilton." She tensed slightly. "You need to return to your ranch. I understand that. I do. But I've also been thinking about Hamilton's need for a doctor and how far we are from medical care at the ranch." He took a deep breath. "What if there was a way to solve both problems?" Lillian frowned, not following his meaning. "I don't understand. Blackfoot Valley is growing. The railroad's planning a spur line within the next year. They'll need a doctor." His eyes held hers intently. "You could establish a practice there. There's a small cabin on my property that could be converted to a clinic until something more permanent could be arranged." The proposal took her by surprise. "You're asking me to leave Hamilton, to move to Blackfoot Valley?" "I'm asking you to consider it," he said carefully. "I know it's sudden. I know we've known each other only a short time, but I also know what I feel when I'm with you, like I've found something I didn't even realize I was missing." Lillian's heart raced. The prospect was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. She'd built a life in Hamilton, established her practice, earned respect. Starting over would mean rebuilding all of that. But when she looked at Ross, when she thought of Emma, she felt a longing for something beyond her medical practice: a family, a partnership, love. "I can't give you an answer right now," she said honestly. "It's a big decision." "I understand," he nodded. "We'll be staying another few days at least. Take your time." The following morning, Lillian was checking Ross's wound when Emma burst into the room, excitement radiating from her small face. Papa, Dr. Lawson, Sheriff Davis caught more of the bad men. They're bringing them to town right now. Ross and Lillian exchanged a quick glance before following Emma to the window. Sure enough, a group of riders was approaching Sheriff Davis and his deputies escorting 3 rough-looking men in handcuffs. Must be the rest of the rustling gang, Ross said grimly. The ones who weren't at the camp. Will they go to jail forever? Emma asked, her earlier excitement giving way to concern. They'll stand trial, Ross assured her. And yes, they'll likely go to prison for a very long time. Lillian watched the child's face, noting the complex emotions their relief, fear, the beginning of closure. Emma, would you like to talk about what happened? Sometimes telling your story can help make the scary feeling smaller. Emma considered this, then nodded slowly. Can we have hot chocolate while we talk? Mrs. Peterson makes it for me every afternoon. I think that can be arranged, Lillian smiled, touched by the girl's resilience. Later, over steaming mugs in the clinic's small kitchen, Emma spoke more fully about her kidnapping, the fear she'd felt, the things she'd overheard, how she'd tried to be brave like her father had taught her. I pretended Mama was watching over me, she confided. Papa says she's our angel now. Ross, listening from the doorway, moved to kneel beside his daughter's chair. She is, sweetheart, and she would be so proud of how brave you've been. Emma leaned into her father's embrace, then surprised Lillian by reaching for her hand as well. I think Mama sent Dr. Lawson to help find me. The simple statement, delivered with childish certainty, brought tears to Lillian's eyes. She squeezed Emma's small hand, unable to speak. That evening, Ross found Lillian in her office, reviewing patient records. Emma's asleep, he said, lingering in the doorway. She asked me to thank you again for the hot chocolate and stories. Lillian smiled. She's delightful company. She also asked if you could come visit us at the ranch sometime. He stepped into the room. She has a collection of interesting rocks she wants to show you. I'd like that, Lillian said softly. Ross moved closer, his expression serious. I know you need time to consider my proposal about Blackfoot Valley, but I want to be clear about something, Lillian. She set down her pen, giving him her full attention. My interest in having you near isn't just about medical care for the valley, he continued. It's about you, who you are, how I feel when I'm with you. He took her hand gently. I'm falling in love with you, Lillian Lawson. I didn't expect it, and the timing may seem rushed, but I know what I feel. Lillian's heart thundered in her chest. Part of her wanted to retreat behind professional distance, to remind herself of all the reasons romantic entanglements had no place in her carefully constructed life. But another part, a part that had been silent for too long, urged her to acknowledge the connection that had formed between them. Ross, she began, unsure how to express the tumult of emotions she was feeling. He raised a hand to cup her cheek. You don't need to answer now. Just know that whatever you decide about moving to Blackfoot Valley, my feelings won't change. If you stay in Hamilton, I'll find reasons to bring Emma to town regularly. If you'd prefer, I'll court you properly with chaperoned visits and formal dinners. A laugh escaped her at the image. I'm hardly a young debutante in need of chaperoning. No, he agreed, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. You're a remarkable woman who deserves to be cherished. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. After a moment of surprise, Lillian found herself responding, her hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lillian couldn't help but smile. That was not what I expected when I agreed to help search for your daughter. Ross laughed, the sound warm and rich. Life rarely gives us what we expect, does it? Sometimes it gives us something far better. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Ross regained his strength rapidly, and preparations were made for his and Emma's return to their ranch. Lillian found herself dreading their departure while simultaneously needing time to think clearly about her future. The evening before they were to leave, a small gathering was held at the sheriff's home, ostensibly to celebrate Emma's safe return, but also serving as a chance for the townsfolk to say goodbye. Lillian watched as Emma charmed everyone present, her natural vivacity returning more each day. "She's quite a girl," Sheriff Davis's wife remarked, joining Lillian by the refreshment table. "She is indeed," Lillian agreed. "And her father's quite a man," Mrs. Davis added with a knowing smile. Half the widows and spinsters in town were setting their caps for him before it became clear he only had eyes for our doctor. Lillian felt herself blush. "Mrs. Davis, oh, don't be embarrassed, dear. It's wonderful to see. You've been alone too long, working too hard." The older woman patted her arm affectionately. "Sometimes the greatest healing happens to the healer." Across the room, Ross caught her eye and smiled, the connection between them palpable even at a distance. In that moment, Lillian realized that her decision had already been made perhaps from the first moment. She'd seen him fighting for his life on Peterson's porch, determined to save his daughter despite his wounds. The next morning, Ross and Emma prepared to depart. Their horses were saddled, provisions packed, goodbyes said to the townsfolk who had helped in their time of need. All that remained was their farewell to Lillian. Emma hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. "You'll come visit soon. You promised to see my rocks." "I did promise," Lillian said, smoothing the girl's dark hair, "and I always keep my promises." Ross stepped forward next, taking Lillian's hands in his. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome," she replied, suddenly finding it difficult to say more. He searched her face. "Have you given any thought to my proposal about Blackfoot Valley?" Lillian took a deep breath. "I have, but I've realized something important, Ross." "What's that?" "I don't need to establish a new practice in Blackfoot Valley to know that I want to be part of your and Emma's lives." She squeezed his hands. "I love my work, but I've come to love you both as well. We can figure out the details together." Joy spread across Ross's face. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying yes," Lillian smiled. "Yes to courting. Yes to visiting Blackfoot Valley. Yes to seeing where this journey leads us." Ross pulled her into his arms, lifting her slightly off her feet in his enthusiasm. "You won't regret it, Lillian. I promise you that." Emma danced around them, clapping her hands. "Does this mean Dr. Lawson might become my new mama someday?" Ross set Lillian down, both of them laughing at Emma's directness. "It means we're going to spend more time together," he told his daughter, "and see what happens." "I think I know what will happen," Emma said with childish confidence. "Happily ever after like in my stories." As Lillian watched Ross and Emma ride out of Hamilton, she felt not loss but anticipation. They had promised to return in 2 weeks' time, and meanwhile, she had preparations to make arranging for Martha to take on more responsibilities, speaking with Dr. Henderson about occasional coverage, sorting through which medical texts and equipment would be essential for establishing a small practice in Blackfoot Valley. The journey ahead would not be simple. There would be challenges in balancing her commitment to medicine with a new relationship, in helping Emma continue to heal from her trauma, in building a life together that honored all their needs. But for the first time in years, Lillian felt the walls of loneliness crumbling around her heart, replaced by something warm and bright and full of promise. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day with golden aspen leaves dancing in the breeze, Lillian Lawson became Lillian Jennings in a simple ceremony outside the newly constructed clinic in Blackfoot Valley. Emma served as flower girl and ring bearer, beaming with pride in her new blue dress. The small cabin Ross had mentioned had indeed been converted not into a temporary clinic, but into a permanent one adjacent to the main ranch house where Lillian now lived. Word of a qualified doctor in the valley had spread quickly, and patients already came regularly seeking her expertise. "Happy, Mrs. Jennings?" Ross asked as they danced under lantern light that evening, their wedding celebration continuing around them. "Extraordinarily so, Mr. Jennings," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm still getting used to the name change. Half my patients still call me Dr. Lawson." "As long as they all know you're mine," he murmured against her hair. "And you're mine," she countered, looking up at him with love. Emma appeared beside them, slightly breathless from dancing with the sheriff, who had made the journey from Hamilton for the wedding. "Papa, can I stay up until all the guests leave? Please?" Ross exchanged an amused glance with Lillian. "Just this once, since it's a special day." As the celebration continued around them, Lillian reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. A gunshot on a rainy night, a desperate father's plea, a child in danger, all setting in motion events that had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. She had come to Montana seeking independence and professional respect. She had found those things, but also something she hadn't been looking for: a family, a partnership, a love that complemented rather than competed with her calling as a doctor. 2 years later, on a summer evening with the scent of wildflowers drifting through open windows, Lillian delivered her own son into the world, with Ross holding her hand and Emma watching in wide-eyed wonder. "He's perfect," Ross whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he cradled the infant. "Thomas," Lillian said softly, having decided on the name months ago, her father's name, a bridge between her past and future. Emma leaned over to examine her new brother, her expression solemn. "He's very red and wrinkly." Lillian laughed, exhausted but elated. "He'll smooth out, I promise." "I'll help take care of him," Emma declared. "I'll read to him and teach him about rocks and show him how to ride when he's bigger." "He'll be very lucky to have such a wonderful big sister," Lillian assured her. Later, with Thomas sleeping in his cradle and Emma finally persuaded to go to bed, Ross and Lillian sat together on the porch, watching nightfall settle over their valley. "Did you ever imagine this?" Ross asked, his arm around her shoulders. "When you first came to Montana," Lillian shook her head. "Never. I thought my life would be my practice, nothing more, nothing less." "Any regrets?" She turned to look at him, at the face that had become so dear to her. "Not one. You and Emma and now Thomas, you haven't diminished my work. You've given it context, given it heart. And you gave us back our future," Ross said, kissing her softly. "When I thought I'd lost Emma, I lost hope. You restored both." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a solitary doctor determined to prove herself in a man's world to a wife, a mother, and still very much a respected physician. The path had been unexpected, occasionally difficult, but immeasurably rewarding. The Montana wilderness had tested her in ways she could never have anticipated, but it had also given her gifts beyond measure: a family to love, a community to serve, a future filled with purpose and joy. She had come west to escape loneliness, never realizing that true connection would find her in the most unexpected way: through a wounded father's determination to save his child, and her own courage to open her heart when it mattered most.